Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to Vivid Earth. Today, I've got Ken Cousins, also known as Kenneth Scott, back with me. He's the founder of PanTerraVida and also Gemstone University and Gem University. And he's been working for 30 odd years on the freedom and the liberation of humanity in a nutshell, studying subjects like common law, the financial system, very deeply. No, sorry, not common law, but law, and deeply. And this is also part of what he teaches in Gemstone University. But I will give Ken just a chance to explain this much better than I can. And just in a nutshell, just for those that haven't seen our last episodes, Ken, how would you describe yourself?
Well, I would describe myself as one who is very passionate about life, and life to me is equal with the principle and the foundation of freedom. Since a very young being in this world, I was very adamantly opposed to outside authority. If you had a little
You can say you're a rebel. It's okay. We're all rebels here.
yes. Well, I like to keep it polite, but yes, I was a rebel. My teachers loved me and hated me. They loved me that I could not pay attention, sit in the back of the room, and screw up with all the guys in the back, and still get straight A's on everything. And they hated me because I sat in the back with all the screw up guys, and I always made noise and you know a general non-cooperative um, engagement with the teachers. So I've been that way my whole life. And so when I got into my teens and early 20s, I always have had a passion for learning. You mentioned when we're off camera that you get bored easily. You need diversity, you need stimulation, you need some depth of exploration. Well, that's how I am too. And fortunately, my family liked to travel a lot. So I broke out of the mold of being stuck in a enclosed or closed system environment. And essentially, when I was pretty young, teens, early 20s, but that's my cat who's stuck in here. Hang on one second. Hey, come on. Come on.
We don't even hear him, so it's all good. And even so, cats are all welcome.
You can't hear him? Okay, very good. It's a very vocal fellow. Um, so really the foundation of my life is that I set out to explore the world and I wanted to essentially make the whole world my home. And I truly have a passion and love for people and all people. And I love diversity of the extraordinary diversity of life and people in this world. And so I love traveling, and I've traveled since I was 6 years old. And first going down to Mexico because I grew up in Los Angeles. And then in my late teens, I started going into South America. I got into a business that was worldwide, which is the gemstone and jewelry business. And so, which I
Hence
love.
the name of your university, I might add.
Hence the name. Yes, exactly. And I can't think of a better business pursuit for me than the gem and jewelry and the mineral specimen business because they're everywhere on the planet. They touch on every race and culture and ethnicity. And so once you get in the gem business, which I did almost 50 years ago, I was able to interact with the whole world. And I was able to travel a lot through the whole world. And I went to South America. You can't hear that. Squawking cat. Um, and I went to South America in 1975 and traveled just with a backpack and on whatever conveyance I could find, and I just was amongst the people. And that was an interesting time in South America because it was a time of just coming out of all the repressive regimes from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and there was revolution in the air. Students were revolting, police and civil servants were revolting, and but then I also interacted with the local people extensively, and and there was a lot of poverty, a lot of everything that is discordant in building a life that's worth living. And so that really dug deep into my passion for wanting to clean up my home. If I was going to make the world my home, I didn't like what I saw in my home, so I wanted to clean it up. Well, I had other passions that eventually led to the study of law, and once I got into law, of course, as I was in the gem and jewelry business, in the precious metals business in the late 70s, and I don't know if you recall, or many of your readers lived through it, but in the 70s, we went from 1971 when Nixon pulled the Bretton Woods Agreement and the attachment of the dollar to the reserve base of the US dollar and the fixed rate of gold on international exchange or settlements. And so from the early 70s to the late 70s, what they were actually doing, which I didn't understand at the time at all, was they were opening up to the exponential expansion of the dollar, creating the dollar as the reserve base, expanding the dollar and its production attached to the consumption of energy, hence the petrodollar. So by the late 70s, when I was just really getting into the gem world, everybody was freaking out. Interest rates were going up to 20%. And as a result of that, people were jumping out of paper, normal banking assets, and they were jumping into hard assets. So the gem and diamond business was exploding. Precious metals at that time hit their highest point in early 1980. And so I got to learn the relationship between wealth or hard assets and the paper world. And then by 1987, 88, I started getting into law and international banking from a different perspective. That perspective not being that I was traveling to Asia or South America or Africa buying things and understanding banking from that perspective, but starting to understand and dip my toes into, well, how does banking really work? And then in the 90s, 91 is when I really opened the door to studying law. And I've been totally immersed in it ever since. And so once we started founding Pantera in the early 2000s, the focus was to build an educational base. And the primary focus of education was banking, monetary systems, law, and the full spectrum of law, and history, and then esoterica, which I had been involved in since I was like 4 or 5 years old. And what we have done in the last 30 to 35 years is integrate all of them from a whole system perspective, which gets into the deeper levels of history, the origins and roots of religion, and what the esoteric or the secret side of religion, and the stratification of real knowledge versus creating a public persona or public perception of reality and controlling the masses through that public perception while creating an elite or a very rarefied level where the initiates and the bloodlines and the priests and the kings and the royal lines and all of that were able to control the public reality. And so that underpinning of esoterica and the creation of religion to control what people thought reality was and basically herd them as a herd of animals into a controlled environment known as religion, known as the temples, known as the gods, and all of that. This is all the foundational structure of what controls the world today in terms of politics, money, banking, and law. And so we built
It's
from
all
there.
intertwined, isn't it? So,
It's all intertwined. And so what I always say to people is if you want to really know both who you are in the reality that you're in and understand the reality, you can't look at the surface and you can't look at one subject to the exclusion of the others because they're
yeah.
all interrelated. So if you don't understand the roots of religion and the control systems in religion, you're not going to know law. You're not going to really know monetary systems. You're not going to, understand the geopolitical events, what is actually controlling the events that we're watching unfold right now. Okay,
Mm,
these go back thousands, hundreds of thousands, probably even millions of years. And so that's what we have built for 35 years in Gemstone University, which is the educational branch or arm of the PanTerraVida Society. And here we are today. So that's why a full spectrum education and a depth of going into each subject and having what I've always called a decoder ring. Decoder ring in my interpretation or my definition is the ability, let's say, to wake up every morning, look at what's in the news, look at what's going on between Russia and Ukraine or Israel and Gaza or United States and China and all these things, and actually be able to decode through the bullshit, through the
mm,
control system that has been homogenized, has been systematized to entrain the minds and the thinking of the regular people in the world. And we were just talking offline about fundamentals like food and health and how little most people know about those two most fundamental subjects.
mm. And
Very,
by design.
yeah, very intertwined and very much by design. So that most people, but that's breaking down, fortunately. But say in the last two generations, most people have now been entrained and programmed since birth to think that, what the medical system tells you is what health is all about, what the food and agricultural system tells you what food is about. Nothing about how the body works, nothing about how nutrition works, nothing about how the mind works.
Yeah.
So,
And doctors weren't even trained in nutrition, which is like, isn't that ground zero of health?
yeah, yeah. Ultimately, it is the design of the externalization of one's true power and authority and putting our power outside of ourselves. And especially in the area of education and young couples who have young families who have not been trained at all during their education for any of these fundamentals, unless they happen to be lucky enough to grow up in a family that already had that basis and foundation. And so, how can the next generations be redirected to actually have access to education, real education? So that's what we've been building in Pantera Gemstone University for the last 30 years. Now, we've had a lot of challenges. We're not anywhere close to what we have envisioned as the full spectrum of what we intend to create, but you know, so goes
It's a
life.
work in progress. And also,
It's a
the
work
world
in
is
progress.
evolving so much.
And the design in the blueprint is very much established, very much defined, which we're not going to go into today. Maybe later on we'll have more discussions of that. But in essence and summary definition, the design of Pantera is to build systems of self-responsibility, self-direction, self-empowerment. People in studying law, the so-called freedom movement, the sovereignty movement, of which I have grown up in. I started studying law in 1990, 91. There was nothing as there is out there today. There were a few people, very far between, who really had a handle on any of these subjects. And because I was in the gem and jewelry business in a particular niche that I had created in the 70s and 80s, I was very flexible, I was very mobile. So I could move at will wherever I wanted, whether it meant going to Asia or whether it meant crossing the states. And so I was able to seek out and find those key people who were the most advanced and the grandfathers and the grandmothers of the law, freedom, sovereignty movement. And ultimately, that led me to a very clear understanding, very precise, that hardly anybody really talks about. They talk about money, they talk about lack of financial resources, and and at the same time, or the next breath, they talk about law and freedom. And yes, we think, okay, money is the issue with law and freedom, but they don't understand how the two correlate and interrelate. They don't understand what sovereignty means. So I grew
Yeah.
up in the 90s and 2000s in my law education. Everybody started talking about sovereignty. I want to be a sovereign. What are you doing? Well, I just signed a piece of paper. Now I'm a sovereign. Well, that's ludicrous. It shows the abject ignorance of how the system works, because nobody can be a sovereign if they are bankrupt. And the entire world system, the entire flow of the 20th century built on the previous 30 or 40 centuries or more was to set up a structure and a system to bind people to a status of insolvency, which is another definition of the word bankruptcy. The whole world, as many people know now, but they don't know how it interconnects. The whole world has been built into a hierarchical one corporation system. And I used to ask people frequently, how many corporations do you think there are in the world? And they'd go, well, everybody and their grandmother and their uncle has a corporation, and there must be billions of corporations. And the actual answer is one. There's only one corporation. It's called the Crown Corporation out of the city of London. The United States, which was eventually converted to being a corporation, is a subsidiary of the Crown Corporation. And then all these so-called nation states, South Africa, Namibia, Venezuela, Mexico, Australia, they are all now corporations, and they're all structured as subdivisions of the United States Corporation. They've all been in bankruptcy almost 100 years. So the entire system is set up for us to operate through a franchise of that bankrupt corporation. And people have this misnomer, which I grew up in and through in the 90s, 2000s, the whole secured party creditor process, the Uniform Commercial Code, the so-called straw man, and we all did the straw man thing. But there's now, with the internet, there's hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people walking around saying, my straw man, I got to do this with my straw man, whatever. And that's a complete bait and switch or misdirection. It's not a straw man. It's a franchise. It's a franchise of the corporate United States or its subdivision, South Africa, Mexico, whatever. And we are bonded to it as the guarantor of all the debt that that we create in the use of that franchise, and so that franchise, whether you call your all capital name and the birth certificate, is basically a debtor facility, and it's bankrupt, and we're the guarantor, and as the guarantor, we are a bankrupt as well. So anybody seeking freedom in law and saying that they want to be a sovereign is at the exact opposite starting place. Okay, you can't achieve what you want if you don't know where you're at and you don't know where you're going. So that's fundamental, and that starts with how the legal and financial system are tied at the hip, and how so much of what's out there and people are trying to do is a non-starter, because they can't get to where they think they're going because they don't know where they're starting from. So these are all the things that I've studied for 35 years, and I've had the advantage of going through all those layers and going very deep into each layer. So that's a brief summary of my background and where we're at. we're teaching in PanTerra and what we invite people to come and really start learning about. And it all does directly to relate to current events, what's going on today in this world.
So, Ken, what is the good news through all of this? People might go, oh, how can I ever get, out of the system and be free and sovereign? In a nutshell, I know there's a lot of work required, but what is the good news in terms of where we currently stand with a lot
Mhm.
of these systems starting to crumble in the background, which is good news in a way, but there will still be, a period of time where we will see um, the buildings fall and be part of the system still. What would you say is the good news of where we are standing here in 2025?
Well, the good news is that all of those systems are that have kept us in bondage. All of those deep historical agendas are truly breaking apart. They're definitely crumbling. Um, it was intended that they would all break apart and crumble under the control of the same controllers with the same agenda and the same intention approximately 20 to 25 years ago. There are some very, very, very good, dedicated people, some who are seen on the public screen and many who are not seen in the public that have worked their entire lives to break that apart and make sure that the agenda controlled and designed collapse was not completed the way it was originally designed. And it was originally designed to be in their control and their collapse and force everybody into a perpetual bondage and enslavement system. That we have seen all of that if one knows how to decode what's been happening for the last 20 years. We've seen it all. Nothing is hidden in that respect. It can be easily summarized in the statement of you will own nothing, you will be happy. You're going into the great reset. The reset is going to be the collapse of the inevitable collapse of a fiat monetary system that has no real foundation. And there are reasons for that. There are reasons mathematically. It's a very simple mathematical formula. Everybody looks at the United States and the founding of the US or the United States of America in the 1770s, 1780s, and the early 1790s as the beacon of freedom. Yes, it has that component. It has that persona as one of numerous personas, but behind the mask of being the beacon of freedom and all of that is the deeper mask, which was that it was designed from the beginning to be very Orwellian, so that peace, that war would equal peace, that financial austerity would equal freedom, all these kind of things. I mean, we could make a list that would last a long time to enumerate it all. But the fact is that the United States of America and the United States, which are two distinct entities, were designed, and this is a whole lesson about how the Constitution was designed, how the documents that were created from 1776 through the 1780s leading to the Constitution, how that structure was designed, how the history behind that, hundreds of years of history led up to that, which we don't have time today to go into, but just to mention how it was all designed to actually end up being the system of entrapment. My cat is just
Mm.
screaming at me. Hey,
He's
go on.
welcome. We don't hear him.
Okay, good. I'll ignore him. Um, in actual fact, the Constitution that everybody says we must go back to is the preeminent, the paramount debt instrument on the planet. Okay.
Mm,
The
okay.
United States of America started as a bankrupt. That was different than the United States in Congress assembled that formed in the 1776 through the 1781 period. The United
Mm-hmm.
States in Congress assembled represented the free and independent states that were declared in 1776. but they were also bankrupt too. They took on huge amounts of debt back at that time, and they were forced into a constitution structure that established two entities: the United States of America, which was controlled by the Crown of England, and the free and independent states that had to contract with the Crown, who was the paramount creditor at that time, through the City of London and the Crown of England, the Crown of France, and basically started as a bankrupt. And in international law, going back to basically the foundations of the law as um, placed or integrated in the Old Testament. Everybody says that the foundation of law is the Old Testament, but only in very specific ways, which we also don't have time to go into today.
Mm-hmm.
Way back then, in how that law was structured, um, that a 70-year period was established as part of international law when sovereign entities would go into what we would call bankruptcy today. So there were three periods of 70 years of bankruptcy from 1789, when the Constitution was enacted, and ultimately through those three successive periods, the end result by the 1930s was that the people and all property on the planet were pledged as the collateral against, during that third period of 70 years from 1929 to 1999. Okay. So the Constitution was designed as a bait and switch. Yes, it's all about freedom. It's about all this great structure. But look at the structure that exists today based on the constitutional structure: separation of powers, three branches of government. Look at how absurdly dysfunctional the US Congress is. And the US
Mm-hmm.
Congress is basically the manager, the administrator of the bankruptcy for the last now almost 100 years, since 1920,
Mm-hmm.
1933. The executor office, or the executive office, is the executor on the handling the management or the administration of a bankrupt debtor in possession. And then during the 30s and 40s, all the countries formulated as nation states were put into bankruptcy, and they were brought all under both the financial and the office of executor, executing the management of the bankrupt estate. So then this is where the birth certificate and what people have called the straw man, which is really a franchise, the whole hierarchical structure of bonding the land, the flesh, and the souls of the living beings to become the liquidated damages, to fall into perpetual bondage where nobody owns anything, everybody's happy. Of course, that's not true. Everybody would be extremely not happy, and
Mm-hmm.
um, but they would be irrevocably past the point of no return. That's what we've been teetering on for the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to ask a question. I've heard some people starting to speak about the concept of federation of America.
Yeah, can you hold on one second?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay.
Right. So the federation of, not sure if it's the United States or America, offhand now. I just read about it the other day, and I heard Anna von Wright speak about the federation notes. And I know there's a lot to unpack, but in what you just said. But I just wanted to ask that before I forget your thoughts on that.
Okay. First, let me finish what I was just saying, that, yes, what's the good news today? The good news is that with a very dedicated, systematic process since World War II, and there's basically been an ongoing battle since World War II. It's really a continuation of World War II. It's basically two teams with opposite agendas and intentions fighting for really who's going to control the world. And well, the people are led down a one path and belief system and so forth, while all this other stuff's going on, including the belief that the paramount instrument of freedom is the Constitution of the United States. What I've just said in summary, because there's a lot of detail behind it, is that it's a two-faced instrument. Yes, it represents certain things that people consider freedom, but it actually has embedded in it a whole lot more that was intended and purposeful since the beginning to become the absolute instrument of enslavement. The good news of today is that what is happening, what we are watching happening, is the final dissolution and settlement of that bonding component of that instrument called the Constitution. And so in order to follow the law, it has to be settled. It has to be settled completely. This is something we can talk about in future discussions, how
This
and
is
the
about the
what,
trust that we spoke about last time, right?
the which.
The trusts, these massive sovereign trusts.
Well,
How
those are components, but always keep in mind that there's not a singular answer for any given question. It's very multifaceted. It's multidimensional. Yes, there are a lot of sovereign trusts, which yes, we did talk about a bit last time. Um, but what are those trusts? What exactly is the nature of a trust? Let's hold that question for a moment. But back to the point is the good news of the day is that deep historical agenda of ultimate bondage, domination, and control of all of life, of all living beings, all life systems, all of those fundamentals, such as food, water, medicine, health, all those things that make life actually real at a fundamental level for every living being, every family, community, and so forth, that agenda is pretty much destroyed. The agenda of control, hierarchical control. The Constitution and the history I've just touched on was ultimately at the base level that was not promoted, especially in the 20th century, was to create a system of bondage and a pyramidal hierarchy that would always be controlled from the top. That is breaking apart now. So we as the people on this planet have the opportunity to actually do something different. But in order to do different, we have to be seriously disillusioned, breaking, dissolving illusion. Most people are in serious
Mhm.
illusion. This is why our focus has always been
Yeah,
education and real education, not fragmented education. Unfortunately, there is so much
yeah.
out there that people think they know what's going on in areas like law or sovereignty or freedom and whatever, and it just ain't so. You know, there's a famous quote of Mark Twain, something like, and I don't know it exactly, but I'll paraphrase. It's great that you know what you think you know, but the problem is what you know just ain't so. You know, and,
Yeah,
um,
it's an incomplete puzzle, right? And we all
yeah,
know.
and it's also rife with disinformation. I've watched this in the law movement for 35 years already.
Mm.
Watched how things get inserted. I could tell stories for weeks
Infiltrated, I'm sure, lots of it.
how things got inserted by basically either knowing um, double agents, people who knew what they were doing, or a lot of people who were, set up to think they knew what they were doing, and then leading hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of people down the wrong path, down the slaughter. And now there's
Mhm.
millions of people. Now with the internet, there is so much out there that is complete bullshit, that is complete misinformation and leading people astray. And
Mhm.
so education is the most fundamental and primary thing that people need to really
Mm.
engage. That's what you're doing, and doing a great job with it in terms of bringing out so much of the specifics of what is really the truth. That's what we're doing. But it's an integrated whole system. You can't look at one subject and think you
Mm.
know it without understanding the co-relationship between the other subjects that I've mentioned. And so
Yeah.
that's the decoder ring, being able to wake up every morning, see what the news of the day is and really understand what's happening below the threshold of public information and disinformation and
Yeah.
all of that. So if
And
we
the
bring,
problem is that people want a quick fix. And I think that's why you're reluctant to give us the good news early on. But I'm all about good news. So that's why I asked that question. But the problem is that people then hang their hat on it and say, oh, it's all going to be fixed without
right,
truly understanding how they got here in the first place. Because if they don't know exactly how they got here in the first place, well, we could just be fooled again, right? So it's really important
exactly.
to understand the structure of our environment and everything in it, including law and finance and all of that, to be able to know what it will take for them to be truly living free lives and not be getting the wool over their head pulled over their head again. And
Hmm.
so that they can start self governing themselves instead of relying on a nanny state
Right.
to look after them.
Yeah. A long time ago, I defined, so everybody was talking about, I want to be a sovereign. So I defined what is a true sovereign. A true sovereign, in a fundamental definition, is one who has self-responsibility, self-direction, self-generating, and self-correcting. Those are the four. We could add a lot more to it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, um, so that is significantly increasing in a lot of ways. People are taking up self-responsibility, like here in the U.S., where the takeover to the end point of the agenda, breaking down all social, moral, ethical boundaries in the education, and having board of education in all these counties and communities going just completely bonkers with, with all the agendas, the transgender, and, breaking all that down, all that stuff that was being forced on the people. Well, now the parents are taking control of their boards of education. That's self-responsibility. And so self-generating. We are self-generating beings. The principle, the feminine principle of life is essentially self-generating. It's the magnetic field through which the masculine principle, which is one's will, which is self-direction, directing your will to building something that's whole, that's integrated, that's well-founded. Those are basically the two principles that we've been divided in our own being going back eons ago. So we're reintegrating that. So after or with self-responsibility are those two principles, self-generating and self-directing. And then, of course, we're fallible beings, and we're always making mistakes, and dealing with our mistakes, and even taking it beyond mistakes, just dealing with who we are in all respects. Um, Karmically, and energetically and genetically, and all the things that we are correcting. So self-correcting is a very important um, component of being sovereign, facing oneself and knowing where we have gone out of balance, because each individual, each living being who follows a path of these four principles, and in self-correcting, what you're doing is you're actually influencing and affecting the larger whole. We live in a hologram, so each individual is a template of the whole, and vice versa. So people say, well, what can I do? You do what's right in front of you in your life to be self-correcting, and then we can say, yeah, but we don't have the opportunity. There's no money circulating. I can't do this, that, and the other. But that's about to change. That's really the good news of the day. Things are dramatically being completed in terms of the termination or the ending of that ages agenda to create that hierarchical system of control, dominance, and um, you know, completing establishing a complete dependency on an external system. So taking our power and authority back, going through the process of learning and educating and healing and all of that, that's affecting one's individual life, one's family, one's community, and it ripples out through the hologram. And when enough people are actually doing that in this world, it's going to tip the balance back to um, activity and living principles that are going to affect the whole. And we are the director of how we want to create the future. So that's the good
Yeah.
news.
It's the 100th monkey effect. So,
Mhm.
if you are here interested in these subjects, it means you are one of the ones that are most likely or have the opportunity to affect change for those that are at this point still fast asleep. And then the more we do the work for ourselves, we always think we have to help 100 people or whatever that to feel purposeful. But actually, as you say, doing the work yourself, becoming self-responsible, self-correcting, and all of those principles within you that will permeate the quantum field. And pretty
Mhm.
soon, everyone will we will reach that tipping point where people will just know that's how we do things.
Mhm.
It's that
Well,
quantum effect
yeah,
that
well, then we're influencing new generations. So instead of going into a hive mind controlled reality that's completely homogenized, that comes from a device or an instrument controlled by a centralized program through an AI controlled matrix system, instead of that, we're recreating a truly living and thriving environment that the new generations can grow up in. So for me, if I had young ones and I was a couple starting out with building a family, first thing I would do is take the children out of public school. I don't know how
absolutely
possible that is in South Africa or other places, but
it's always
basically,
possible.
okay, well, we interact with a lot of people in the Commonwealth countries. We have members in South Africa, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. There's a lot of passivity and a lot.
Mm,
There's either passivity or rage, both
yeah,
of which don't get you anywhere. Rage, you
yeah,
want to rage against the machine, you want to fight, you want to go to war, you want to use law to get back at them. All of
mm,
those things are really going to bounce back at oneself, and you're not
yeah,
going to get where you want to go. That's some of the principles that we work with and are well founded on. Passivity is not going to do anything either. If you go into, indolence or passive acceptance or whatever, you're not going to go very far with it. You're going to go where they want you to go. So I say that only because we've interacted with people in the Commonwealth, and there's a lot of, oh, well, you can do that in America, but we can't do it here because of blah, blah, blah. Well,
mm,
none of that is true. Ultimately, if you study the history of the Commonwealth and the British and the English, which are two distinct things,
yeah,
there's a whole other history that, at some time we can get into. But British is Britannia, which is basically a division of Rome. Okay.
yeah,
And who really was fighting the American Revolution was the British and the English fighting each other. And so what happened with the Commonwealth and what was created with the creation of the United Kingdom and the homogenizing into a corporate structure, when you study the law and the history of places like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and South Africa, you see how it was all done as a bait and switch. And that, in fact, in those Commonwealth countries, you have absolutely the same capacity to shirk off that homogenization and say that, well, I can't do that or whatever it is. And that you have those things in America, but we don't have them here. Well, part of what's happening on the geopolitical event horizon right now with what the Trump administration and all of that is taking place here is going to break all of that apart. The British Empire and the Roman Empire is truly imploding on itself. So you have every opportunity right now to do these things. But if you think you can do it individually and separate from your larger community, that's an impossibility too. The people have to come together in communities, both local, regional, and, for lack of a better term right now, national, and really come together, because separated, it's called divide and conquer. You are always
Exactly.
conquerable when you don't have the support of a real community of like-minded people who are working together to support and protect each other. And that's what part of what we have structured in the design of PanTerra. And PanTerra is modeled on a decentralized model. A lot of people who have come and gone think that, oh, Ken is just trying to create himself as the emperor and the king and the, all. That's just pure projection of matrix thinking that shows how
Mm,
ignorant those people saying that really are. Because that's
mm.
not what Pantera is, that's not the blueprint, but it requires the education. So again, as always, I encourage people to come into becoming a member of Pantera through the mechanisms and the steps and the structure we've created, and really start learning how to do this, because a lot of what we teach, besides all these subjects we've talked about, is how to build a decentralized but focalized community structure in your own country and your own local community. So
Yeah,
coming together to support each other in community, to start being self-responsible. So is the government supposed to be responsible for your children's education? Only if you want them to be homogenized and slotted into a hive mind Borg reality. Okay. If you want true freedom, true self,
indoctrination camps, that's what they are.
pardon?
The schools are nothing more than indoctrination camps.
Yeah. Um, So anybody watching this with young ones, the first step towards your sovereign standing is to get your children out of school,
Hmm.
um, and come together with a community that can support each other. Because one of the first things people say is, "Well, but I have a job. I can't do that because of blah blah
Hmm.
blah." But you have a
Exactly.
community that you can share responsibilities and work together to build the education. In fact, 2 nights ago. I had a Zoom call with one of our members in Australia, a woman who uh, her son or their son, it's a married couple, was being herded basically into a situation that they were then sending in child protective services. And she was
Mm.
very concerned. And in fact, they had people come over to her house, CPS, and say, one of three things is going to happen here. Either we accept your story, okay, it's valid, blah, blah, blah. I won't tell any of the details. The second one is we don't accept it, but we'll work with you to, correct the problem. The third one is we just take your children away. And what I
Hmm.
said to her is, the thing is that these programmed people, these robotic hive mind people who are in positions of education or health or those things that they will always come in energetically or at a subconscious level, they already know who's not one of them. They know a
Hmm.
family that's not going along with the program. And so they want to destroy that. They want to
Hmm.
destroy innocence and the family unit and all of that, so that they will own and control the young ones and program them and all of that.
Mm. And they make
And,
an example out of them as well, so
and
other parents are extremely scared of it happening to them.
so and so then, but she said, well, the husband works, but right now I don't work, but I don't have a support system. And I said, well, create it. Find other like-minded people. They're all out there in everywhere around the world. And but also that we have been building in PanTerra in our educational structure. We have one team that's been going very deep in classical education. We haven't yet formalized it into structure on Gem University, but we have gathered all the raw materials, not all, but a very significant amount. All the education that really created self-directed thinking individuals, not programmed, indoctrinated individuals. And this is leading towards creating a homeschooling module or sector for families who are homeschooling, to actually combine all the elements of creating a very well-rounded young person growing up and maturing. True intellectual education, going back to the classical models, but
Mm.
also education in nature and art and all those good things.
The things that really matter.
Yeah, that make life life,
Yeah.
And I don't know about your school system, but when I was, in school, we had a lot of that. We had physical education, we had music, we had language and stuff like that. They've taken that all away in the schools for lack of
Mm.
funding.
Yeah, all of those are extracurricular activities now, keeping
Yeah.
those poor kids busy till 5, 6 every day, and then they
Mhm.
still have to do the homework, and it's just,
And it's all rote, it's all programming.
yeah,
And a lot of it's just false information.
yeah,
So I talked to this woman about, well, how can you really create homeschooling and build your family life, your financial life around that? And it's very simple. Even if both parents have jobs, if you build a community, then the community supports.
exactly.
Jobs are always different in terms of time and all of that. So you share responsibilities so that the children are always protected, they're always safe, they're in a nurturing educational environment, and it's pretty simple. So
Yeah,
to me, that's the first step towards freedom is putting something like that together.
yeah,
And there are now already in motion significant breakdown of the limitation through the monetary and the financial system. That's definitely going to open up. Now, I will say that I don't um, agree 100% with what the Trump administration is doing. There's some major red flags, but I know by and large that there are other factors including the military alliance that is now very advanced in the military confrontation of the entrenched deep state and all of that. But one of the things that is happening through the Trump administration is opening up the financial, monetary, and the banking systems. So there's going to be significant opportunities to rebuild, restructure one's life or one's family or community to become financially capable of doing these kind of things, you know. And so the good news of the day, you asked me, is it's all right here. It's all ready to happen. And in the next
mm,
6 months and sooner, in the next month, we're going to see very dramatic things happen.
hmm,
And all the veils and the hidden curtains that hide the agendas that most people have believed are real are being ripped apart, ripped aside. So that's for me, the good news of the day.
yeah. So people need to come together, learn. So by the time all of this unfolds, because it's going to be about we, the people now. We're not going to wait for people to rebuild a system for us. We have to be part of that rebuilding process. We have to understand or understand what we're dealing with and be part of that rebuilding process through, knowledge is power. So that's why I encourage people to study these subjects, you know, to be part of the PanTerraVida Society, learning through that platform and the Gemstone University. So people are empowered to be
Mhm.
part of the change and not to sit back and be a passenger in the back.
Exactly.
But
So
the
you
good news
mentioned
is, sorry,
so you
yeah.
mentioned federation. Did you have a specific question about that? What does that mean? Where did it come from?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously know about the United States and I saw somebody starting to speak about the Federation notes. That's going to the U.S. Federation note. Sorry, I don't know the terminology exactly. That's going to replace the U.S. dollar, the fiat dollar as we see it now. Um, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, whether that's a misdirect or something that's part of this new
Hmm.
structure.
So you're talking about a monetary issue that will be issued or emanated from a federated system?
Yeah,
Is that what people are saying? Is that what Anna von Reitz is saying?
yeah.
Okay. Um, well,
Sorry, I just mentioned it. I didn't deeply read up on this. I just saw. Oh, okay. because personally, that source I haven't always gravitated towards, but it felt like there was a little bit of a U-turn made, and I was surprised to even hear those terms
Hmm.
coming out of her mouth, to be honest. And
I'm
as I said, I haven't
not
looked deeply
surprised,
into
but
it. No,
um,
you're not surprised.
yeah, that doesn't mean I agree with it or think that that's what is a building block or foundation of the solution. And again, that's a very charged word that people don't really know what it means or understand. Basically, a federation is an aggregation of um, political units. We can call them states. Um, that
But it's still
that
centralized, right? Otherwise, it would be a
exactly
confederation.
it's a method of centralization. So, um, you know, the principle of the constitutional structure of the United States and the United States of America was to create a quasi-federated structure that had a national identity while maintaining the decentralized independence and sovereign identity of the participating states. So that's the model that was created by the US Constitution. But see, that's exactly what we started with, the two faces or the two masks, where something is
Mm.
put forward as this is
Looks free,
the
and
ideal, it
but
looked
it's
like,
not quite so free.
but it's a bait and switch, and it's basically ultimately an Orwellian construct, so that you have people believing they're free in a federated system while they have been progressively more and more centralized and and controlled from a hierarchical central point.
Mhm.
And if you look at the history of the United States over the last 200 years, it's the perfect example. If you look at the Constitution, the United States of America is only mentioned twice in the Constitution. It's mentioned in the preamble, and it's very clearly a contract between the United States, starts by saying, "We, the people of the United States," and it ends by saying, "Do hereby establish and ordain this Constitution for the United States of America." It identifies the two parties of the contract. It gives a
Mhm.
summary statement of what the Constitution and the United States of America is supposed to do to be put in place, the general welfare and the other things that are named in the preamble. And most people conflate, which means put together as if the United States and the United States of America are one and the same thing. Well, that's
Yeah.
the way the programming has been for the last 100 years or so. Um, the only other place where the United States of America is mentioned is Article 2. It says there will be a president of the United States of America. But you go back to earlier instruments in the 1780s, 1782 and 1783, it basically states the United States of America is owned and controlled by George III, or essentially the Crown Corporation. Okay. The United States of America is there to oversee the financial interests of the crown, to make sure that the United States that is going to be bound into the contract of the Constitution fulfills its financial obligations, which it never could. It was designed to fail from the beginning and hence be put into those three phases of bankruptcy. Okay.
Mm.
So and of course, everybody knows who's here, I'm sure, watching us, that there were three city states, and Washington, D.C. was the ultimate third state to control the military, the commercial, and the monetary system. And so that was set up from the beginning with the structure of the Constitution. So
Yeah.
that created a quasi-federated system that ultimately would become completely federated, would become completely centralized, so that all the departments, Department of Education, Department of Agriculture, Department of the Interior, Department of Energy, all of the departments under the executive office were centralized to control everything under which the people were bonded as the collateral guarantors of the obligation of the original debt established in 1789. Most people don't know that the word constitutor means it is defined as one who takes on the obligation of a debt of another party. So that's the root base of the word constitution. If you look in Article 6, it starts by saying um, the um, um, the debts and engagements previously obligated to or bound to the United States are hereby reinstituted as obligations of the United States, now the United States of America in Congress assembled. So United States of America in Congress assembled is a inferior body under the executor or the administrator of the bankruptcy representing the creditor interests of the Crown Corporation. Okay, so all the legislation created over the last 250 years or 200 and 36 years was basically for that purpose. And it was supposed to be limited to the territorial jurisdiction of the United States, which was the 10 square miles in all territories. But then it was moved inside out so that every state became a corporatized state in the United States, ultimately 50 corporate states. And they're all defined in the US Code as part of the District of Columbia, essentially. Then, after 1933 and the extension of the Federal Reserve note as the reserve currency through the Bretton Woods Agreement of the 1940s, and it put all of the central banks owned mostly by the Rothschild banking system, into a subservient structure under the obligation of the master bankrupt United States. It all goes back to the Constitution and Article 6 that established this structure. And so people don't know that. People are out there putting the Constitution up the flagpole and saluting it. And we're going back to the Constitution. No, we're not. If we did, we would continue to be bound under that construct and
Mm,
yeah, and the federalization of the entire system that then extended after World War II and the UN and the IMF and the World Bank and the Bretton Woods Agreement and the central bank system to all be federated under essentially the District of Columbia. So that the District of Columbia was the third gem or jewel in the crown of the triple crown of the Vatican, City of London, and DC to
yeah.
control the commercial system through the monetary system, through underwriting of all the bonded debt, and basically the enforcement through the military.
Hmm.
Fortunately, all of that was centralized and organized in the office of the president. Okay. So there was something that was created in the early 1940s called the Office of the Executive. Okay, that's different than the Office of the President. Even
Hmm.
though the Office of President was the United States of America back
The
to the
corporation, right?
basically the bankrupt administrator. Okay, this is why they call, oh, it's a new administration. It's the Biden administration. It's the Trump administration. Administration of what? Administrated administration means the administrator of a bankrupt estate. That's how it was structured. So this is
Mm,
how language, people use language all day long. You can probably sit in on a sovereignty discussion and they'll be saying things like the Constitution is, the best thing since sliced bread, and the administration of the Trump presidency is our best bet to, free free the world. But what Trump actually is doing is he is the administrator through the Office of Executive on the dissolution and settlement of the bankrupt estate that includes every nation state, which aggregately includes the United Nations, to settle and close all of the obligations of the entire bankrupt estate. So
hmm.
that is a good thing, but you have to know what it really means. And so
Yeah.
Office of the Executive was created by FDR in the early 1940s to put all of the administrative structure, which includes all these bloated departments, you know, the everyone that I mentioned and many more, as the administration of the bankrupt estate and the collateralization of the people, persons, property, and financial attachments through a federated system that's hierarchically controlled at the top. So that's my answer to the word federation. And you can look through the history of the last 100 years. How many countries were converted to federated systems?
Yeah. Well, that was very well explained, I must say. I mean, I know quite a fair amount about the subject, but nobody's really explained it like that to me. So I think that's very helpful. And I'm sure you know about, I mean, you're aware of the Washington, D.C. that's just been federalized as well, meaning the city state has now been taken control of through the Trump administration, which I think is for a very specific reason. And
Yeah.
then obviously that's just the
And,
start.
and actually, um, on June 14th this year was the military parade that happened in DC. Okay.
Hmm.
And there's a little um, short clip that does has circulated, and some people talking about it that know what they're talking about, that a Marine personnel, I don't know what his rank was, whatever it was, um, came up to Trump during that activity, and he handed him a
Yes.
folded triangulated flag. And he said, essentially, here you go, sir. I'm paraphrasing, but here you go, sir. The mission is accomplished. Well, what that means was that was the celebration of the 250th anniversary of the foundation of the United States military, the de jure lawful military, not the corporatized military that has been in existence our entire lives. Um, and basically, it has to do with the nature of international military conquest. There are international treaties out of The Hague about how the rules of war on land, 1899, 1907, how the rules of international maritime and admiralty law of the sea were transposed or transmigrated onto the land to basically be the implementation or the overlay of admiralty and maritime. Bankruptcy is a function of admiralty law. Civil code is the nature of a military conqueror's implementation of civil management of a people who have been put into a containment called the civitas, going back to Roman civil law, and the containment of a conquered people. So, there are two aspects of the control of that federated corporatized system. One is military conquest, and the other is admiralty rules of bankruptcy. So, so this was allowed and required essentially to reach its zenith or its full expression by the coup and the takeover of Washington, D.C. through the deep state agenda, allowing the Biden administration actually to take over and basically complete the full military conquest of the original structure of the lawful the good side, if you will, the good mask of the Constitution, pre-Constitution structure, going back to 1775 when the Continental Congress established formally the the army, and so basically that passing of the flag was the government in exile taking back the seat of government, the capital, and taking control over it. And so everything that's been happening since then, including the bringing in of the federalized National Guard to take full military control of Washington, D.C., and now moving out to take control of the conquered states through the cities, Baltimore, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, and all the rest of that. This is the military taking back control, actually, for the de jure lawful original government that we could call a republic, but the republic never actually really existed. What's now being put in place, what's prepped to be put in place, is the true implementation of an actual republic form that was required by by the Constitution, but pretty much only operated in a quasi legitimate or lawful way, especially by the Civil War time and post-Civil War. There was no republic. It was an abandoned house. Now, um, the the office of the executive, but really the office of the commander in chief is taking back for the people. And Trump said it in his first inauguration in 2017. I am here to take back the power and give it back to the people. So the
Yes.
people are set to take back the power of their own self-governing and self-responsible position. Hence, the
Hmm.
requirement for real education and real knowledge of all of this and how it was done and how we have to, not just in the United States, but worldwide, actually set it up so that the people truly are self-governing.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. Beautiful. And obviously, the US is going to be first with this. It looks like England is a close second. We saw people protesting on the streets with the flag of England just a few days ago. Nigel Farage already mentioning in Parliament about going back to common law, and that's a whole nother subject that we'll have to unpack in the next episode.
Yeah. Well, why
Um,
don't we finish by my setting up what that really means? Okay. Because that's out there in the whole law movement, the sovereignty movement. Oh, we're going back to common law. Many people have been trying to implement doing common law grand juries or trying to go into court, not understanding the true nature of the multifaceted construction of how law works. To really understand law and be empowered at the center of that knowing, you have to understand how jurisdiction works, how law form works, and things like, excuse me, things like that. Common law is one of probably 7 or 8 law forms. There's canon law, ecclesiastical law, there's kingdom law, there's corporate law, there's commercial law, there's common law, there's civil law, which is not really law, but these are the multifaceted components of an integrated whole system that's called law. And
and then there is natural law, which is a
mhm, there's natural law. So I
sorry,
think it's your camera.
just went
So
off myself.
we'll just finish in 1 or 2 minutes to just lay the foundation. Then this is what I know your time was shorter today, so we'll end here and we'll go on to the next time we could meet. But common law is known as what? The law of the land. Okay. That's literally why it's the law of the land. As I just said earlier, they progressively from the 1850s to the 1930s moved the law of the sea, which is very much hierarchical. It's called admiralty for a reason, because the admiralty in a seafaring political military structure, we can look at English, British history, and they talk about the admiralty and they talk about, the courts of vice admiralty and star chambers and all of this. Um, that the law of the sea is basically hierarchical, that the captain of the ship must have hierarchical control to maintain order and discipline on the ship. Because if you allowed common law to control the management of a ship out on sea, it would be chaos and they would go down very quickly. So you have to have a rigid hierarchical control. So the office of captain is a subdivision or a subunit under the office of the admiralty. In the legal system emanating from the four inns of court and the bar system in the city of London, to achieve a rank of esquire requires the minimum rank of a captain. So an esquire, which is what they call an attorney out of in the bar, out of the four inns of court that controls the financial and the law structure, has to be the captain of a ship. And so all these bar card carrying attorneys, their job is to attorn you back into their system, to turn you back into it. The way they do it is that bar card is a letter of marque and reprisal, giving the sovereign of a of a sovereign entity the ability to issue letters of marque and reprisal for a captain of their ship flying their flag to board an enemy ship to take control of the ship and reprise the cargo, the booty, the passengers, the crew back to their sovereign. This is what happens in the court system. It's an admiralty system where the bar licensed attorneys carrying letters of marque and reprisal board the individual vessel in commerce of that bankrupt franchise in order to plunder the booty and bring it to their sovereign. So that's why they brought the law of the sea onto the land, which is more history than I've mentioned, but that's essentially what happened. And um, so when you do that, you have an overlay of the law of the land. The law of the land does not exist because there's nobody who can stand on the land as a bankrupt. A bankrupt has no standing, cannot state a claim in that admiralty court, and therefore cannot stake a claim on the land. Staking a claim establishes the four corners of my metes and bounds sovereign standing in my own domain. Okay, that must be honored in a properly structured, balanced, lawful system. So people are saying that they're going, they have a law, a common law grand jury, or they're going to implement common law. They're going to go into court and claim common law. They don't know what they're doing. They can't because of the fundamental impairment to their status. That the court knows that, the clerk knows that, the prosecutor knows that, and you're basically looked at as a fool. You're a sovereign citizen. You are the property of the state as a citizen, babbling about saying that you're a sovereign, but you're not. And now that is
Mm.
wide, in all the Commonwealth, so-called English common law states or nations, people have got this thing, oh, well, common law, common law. But that can't happen until all of the underlying bondage to the monetary system of monetized debt and all of that is completed, which is now actually being completed. We can talk about next time. But this is going to give the potential for somebody to actually claim their estate and have the standing on the land. And hence you have the capacity to utilize common law, but you have to understand what is common law and what isn't common law. You have to understand what equity is, which is one of the law forms I didn't mention. People are out there talking about equity. Then that's been bastardized by this thing called diversity and equity and inclusion. So they take everything that's real and they flip it and they create this illusional thing that they promote and get in the minds of all the people who are
Mm.
completely clueless, as we have watched for the last 5 to 10 years. But even people who think they know what the law is and are claiming common law, they don't understand equity. And how does
Mm.
equity relate to common law? Do you even understand that there was something that merged equity and law in the 1870s called the Judicature Acts? Have you ever heard of the Judicature Acts?
I have not.
Okay, well, look it up. And what happened in 1873 and 1875, and what that did to blend or merge equity and law to eventually be migrated into something called civil code, civil system, which was the management of the bankrupt estate and the militarily conquered state over the last, say, 100 years, 150 years actually. So there's many, many components of understanding all of this, how the history of law works, how the blending and the bastardizing and the homogenizing, getting people who don't know what they're talking about, saying that they're implementing or utilizing common law. So again, this is what we teach in PanTerra. So you really know who you are, where you're standing, and how to get to where you want to go. So common law can be a good thing. It can be a weapon used against the people. Um,
Mm.
and just like everything else, it's always bastardized, it's always mirrored.
They always infiltrate all
Yeah.
movements and
All, So this is just a quick synopsis or summary about such things as admiralty, law of the sea, law of the land, the law of the land is common law. What is actually a common law court of record? How does that work? Has that ever existed in our lifetime? No, it hasn't. Is that something that can be reinstituted? Yeah, but we've learned a lot about how it was actually a bait and switch, how it was seemingly the answer, but then used against us. And these are what we teach. And in Pantera, we have formulated a law form, which a society, public or private, has the authority and the power to do. And so people can go to ptvcourt.org and get a look into how that law form is constructed. We have articles of our court that blend and balance and integrate the best of all law forms, you know, law, equity, and other law forms. This is part of the education, part of the model that we've built over the last 30 years. And this actually goes back to the origination in terms of religion of what was constructed to create the counterpose um, two primary structures that ultimately would be fully implemented during our time. And that's called the law of the priest and the law of the king, which I've written extensively about and people can look into. We can start our next session by talking about that and how that was used or constructed to basically move everybody into a containment field that was hierarchically controlled from the top, the law of the priest. Canon law, ecclesiastical law. Most people do not know that all their governments are constituted and controlled as ecclesiastical law, controlled from the top, from the Vatican, from something called the Roman Curia, which means a Roman court. All of our courts are really ecclesiastical courts. All of our city municipalities and city and municipal structures are ecclesiastical. This is where the implementation of the law of the priest was put in place. What we have to do is take back our law universally and structurally in the living being, the individual, the family, the community, everything we talked about earlier, and how to build systems and principles based on universal law that takes the power of the priest, because they're all priesthoods. There are priests of the medical, the legal, all systems, they're all designed
Yeah,
priesthoods. They're all
yeah,
designed on the ecclesiastical canon law structure and how to dissolve that and take our full self-responsibility, our real sovereignty, and our implementation of real law, which, as you said, the ultimate is natural law, which is always the law and the principle of balance, equity, integration, and common sense.
yeah. Wow, that was packed with information. I must say, I thought I had a good understanding, but today was just the next level lesson, law, and everything that is really making up our societies. And I think we're going to have to do a part two very soon because this is getting really interesting. But
Very
unfortunately, I've got a packed schedule. I wish we could go on, but we will definitely do a part two. That was fascinating. And
Part
yeah,
two
I
of
just
part
encourage
three.
people to go and read further. I'll leave all the links below that you mentioned so people can go and read up on it and just empower themselves. It's all fascinating. So,
Very good. So it's part two of part three of 12 parts of our 12 course.
indeed, there are many more parts to come for sure.
Right.
Thank you so
Wonderful.
much for sharing this, your abundance of knowledge and information and wisdom. We really appreciate and all the work that you've put into this for the past 30 years. And I'm sure you will harvest the fruits of all of this in a very abundant way very soon. And all of us will have the benefit of that as well. So, yeah, it's such an exciting time to be alive. And I can't wait to do part two
All right.
of
Great.
this
You have a
particular.
great night and I'll have a great day. And we'll
Thank you
see
so much.
you soon.
Thanks so much, everyone. Uh, ooh, okay, here we are. Thanks, everyone.